Nalo didn't have much, just a tiny room she called her world. But when Uncle Bako fell ill, she gave it up without a second thought. Her siblings laughed behind her back, calling her naive, calling her stupid. They had no idea that the man in her bed wasn't just dying. He was watching. Nalo was the kind of girl who never asked for much. She didn't wear fancy clothes or chase after attention like her siblings. She was the quiet one, the one who helped without being told, the one who stayed in the background. In a small house where every inch mattered, her tiny room was her only space, her little world of peace. But when her Uncle Bako fell seriously ill and had nowhere to go, Nalo didn't even hesitate. She gave him her room. Just like that, she moved out with only a pillow and a blanket, and made a small corner in the hallway her new bed. She cooked for him, cleaned his wounds, gave him his medicines on time, and sat by his side every night, even when her body ached from the cold floor. While she did all of this, her siblings watched and laughed. Yanni, always dressed up, would walk past Nalo and smirk. "You're wasting your youth being a nurse," she'd say. Tuso, always loud and ready to blame, told neighbors that Nalo was acting like a saint just to get something from Uncle Bako. "She thinks being kind will pay her one day," he joked. They both called her names, maid without pay, fake angel, and sometimes even worse. But Nalo never fought back. She didn't care about what they said. She remembered how Uncle Bako once stayed up all night to cool her fever when no one else did. How he used to bring her books when she was too shy to ask for them. Now it was her turn. And she wanted to make sure his final days were peaceful, even if it cost her everything. While her siblings chased comfort and mocked her choices, Nalo stayed close to her uncle, brushing his hair, holding his hand, and whispering kind words in his ears. She didn't want praise. She didn't want money. She just wanted to do the right thing. And though no one noticed it at the time, Uncle Bako did. He may have looked weak, but he was watching everything, every action, every word, every bit of kindness. And deep in his heart, he already knew who truly loved him. Uncle Bako's health started getting worse. He couldn't move much, and sometimes he forgot things. His body grew weaker, and the room always smelled of medicine and old age. Nalo did everything she could, cleaned him, fed him, helped him sit up, even when her own hands were tired. But instead of helping, her siblings started complaining. Yanni, with her perfect nails and fancy clothes, hated the smell. "This whole house stinks now," she'd whisper loud enough for Nalo to hear. All because of one old man. She began inviting her friends over just to show off her new shoes or gossip. When they laughed and asked about the man in the room, Yanni rolled her eyes and said, "That's our family project, Nalo's little charity case." Her friends laughed too, and Nalo stood in the kitchen, pretending not to hear. But her chest tightened every time. Tuso was no better. He walked around with a frown, grumbling about the cost of medicine. "Why are we spending so much on someone who's already halfway gone?" he said more than once. He told the neighbors, "Watch Nalo. She's acting like a saint. She thinks being sweet will make her the favorite. Wait and see. She's not doing this for love. She wants something." The neighbors would nod, some agreeing, some unsure. Nalo heard these things. Sometimes she cried quietly in the bathroom. Sometimes she just stayed silent. She knew they didn't understand. They never saw the way Uncle Bako's hand gripped hers at night when he was scared. They didn't notice the little smile he gave her when she brought him warm soup. But none of that mattered to them. All they saw was trouble, expense, and an old man who couldn't speak up for himself. But what they didn't know was that Uncle Bako heard everything. He didn't talk much anymore, but his ears still worked. He heard Yanni's cruel jokes. He heard Tuso's lies. He heard every name, every insult, every word of doubt spoken about Nalo. And each night, when he was alone, he would reach for his small notebook under the bed. His hands trembled, but he wrote names, moments, words. He was quiet but not blind. And he was taking note of who stood by him, and who only stood in the way. One quiet evening, the rain tapped gently on the windows while the air inside the house felt heavy with sadness. Uncle Bako had been having a rough day. He hadn't eaten much, and his breathing was slower than usual. A nurse came that evening to clean his wounds and check on his condition. She had been there before, but this time something was different. When she entered the room, she found Nalo sitting beside Uncle Bako. She had a small bowl of warm oil, and was gently massaging his tired, thin feet. Her hands were shaking from exhaustion, but her touch remained soft and caring. Her face looked pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept well in days, but still, she smiled at her uncle and whispered, "You'll feel better soon. Just a little more, uncle." Her voice was kind and full of love. The nurse quietly unpacked her tools and got to work, but her eyes kept going back to Nalo. How carefully she wiped her uncle's face, how she held his hand between hers, how she fed him spoon by spoon with so much patience. Even when some of the food fell back onto the bed, Nalo didn't complain. She didn't rush. She just cleaned it up gently and tried again. The nurse tried to focus, but her hands started shaking. She turned away and pretended to look at her bag, but her shoulders began to tremble. She quickly walked to the corner of the room, covering her mouth. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks. She had seen many families, many patients, but rarely had she seen love this pure, this quiet, this selfless. When she finally gathered herself and came back, she looked at Nalo and whispered, "You're not his daughter, but you love him like one." Nalo looked up, surprised. She didn't say anything at first. Then she gave a small nod, her eyes a little glassy too. Uncle Bako hadn't opened his eyes the entire time. He hadn't spoken a word. But as Nalo gently wiped his forehead and hummed an old lullaby, a single tear escaped from the corner of his closed eye. It slid slowly down his cheek. The nurse saw it. Nalo saw it. And in that small, quiet moment, with no applause, no audience, and no rewards, something big happened. Love spoke louder than any words. Pain met peace. And though Uncle Bako's body was failing, his heart was full. No one else in the house knew what happened in that room that evening. But the ones who were there would never forget it. Yanni's birthday was always a big deal in the house. She made sure of it. The decorations were loud, the music was louder, and she had invited all her friends to show off her new dress, her makeup, her style, everything. The house was filled with laughter, noise, and the smell of food that Nalo had spent the whole morning preparing. No one offered to help her. While Yanni got her hair done and posed for pictures, Nalo chopped, stirred, and cleaned. Not because she wanted to, but because someone had to. That evening, as guests filled the house, Nalo moved quietly from room to room, serving snacks, refilling drinks, picking up empty plates. Her face looked tired, but she wore a polite smile. She didn't want to ruin Yanni's big day. She stayed out of the way, stayed small, invisible. But that didn't stop Yanni from dragging her into the spotlight. When it was time for the toast, everyone gathered around Yanni. She stood with a glass in her hand, glowing with attention. She looked around, smirked, and said loudly, "Let's raise a glass to Nalo, the servant of our sickly shrine." The room exploded in laughter. Some people chuckled awkwardly, unsure if it was really a joke. Others laughed loudly, clapping like it was the funniest thing ever. Nalo froze for a second, her heart sinking, but then forced a tiny smile. She didn't want to make a scene. She just nodded and continued picking up cups. No one thought about Uncle Bako, lying alone in the back room that night. No one wondered if he had eaten. No one checked if he needed help. Everyone was too busy dancing, drinking, and posting selfies. Nalo, between serving and cleaning, kept slipping away to check on her uncle. She fed him quietly, cleaned his forehead, and whispered that the party would be over soon. But what nobody in that noisy house knew was that Uncle Bako had done something important just that morning. Before anyone arrived, he had written a letter. He placed it carefully in an envelope and sealed it. On the front, in shaky handwriting, he had written, "To the family, only after my death." It sat quietly on his small table, unnoticed and untouched. While Yanni laughed, while Tuso drank, while Nalo worked, the envelope waited. It carried words that would change everything. The night was quiet. Rain tapped softly on the windows, and the house felt colder than usual. Everyone had gone to bed after the noise of Yanni's birthday. Laughter had faded. Music had stopped. But in the back room, where Uncle Bako lay, another kind of silence filled the space, the kind that felt heavy and full of meaning. Nalo sat beside him, like she always did. She had just finished changing his bedsheets and cleaning the little spill from his medicine. She knew he wasn't doing well. His hands had grown colder, his breathing slower. She gently held his hand, rubbing it softly, hoping to bring him some warmth. The light from the small lamp beside the bed flickered, casting a soft glow on the two of them. Uncle Bako slowly opened his eyes and looked at Nalo. His voice was weak, but every word felt like it carried the weight of 100 thoughts. You remind me of your grandmother, he whispered. Strong, loyal, gentle. Nalo's eyes filled with tears. She had heard stories about her grandmother, how she had taken care of everyone, how she had given even when she had nothing. It meant everything to be compared to her. Uncle Bako smiled weakly. His lips trembled, but he kept speaking. I didn't raise you, he said softly, but I watched you raise my hope. Nalo squeezed his hand, trying to hold back the tears, but one slipped down her cheek. She leaned forward and kissed his forehead gently. Rest, uncle. I'm here, she whispered. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the world felt still. Uncle Bako's breathing slowed more. He took one deep breath, then another, and then nothing. Just stillness. Nalo sat there in silence, her hand still in his. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't panic. She just held him, as if holding him could keep him a little longer. She stayed like that until the first light of morning touched the curtains. In the other rooms, Yanni and Tuso were fast asleep, dreaming of the house, the land, the money. They had no idea what had just happened. They didn't feel the shift in the air. They didn't hear Uncle Bako's final words. They didn't see the peace on his face. But Nalo did. She was there, not for an inheritance, not for attention, just for love. And in that moment, as the world slowly woke up, Uncle Bako's room was full of something that couldn't be bought: dignity, love, and the quiet goodbye of a man who finally rested in peace. 1 week after Uncle Bako's quiet passing, the family gathered in the living room for the will reading. The air was tense, like everyone was holding their breath. Yanni arrived in a bright outfit, full of makeup and fake smiles. She laughed loudly and greeted the lawyer, as if she already knew she was getting something big. Tuso walked in with his phone in one hand and a calculator in the other, already talking about how much the house and land might be worth. Nalo sat quietly at the back. Her clothes were simple, and her hands rested in her lap. No one paid her much attention. To Yanni and Tuso, she was just the helper, the girl who gave up her room, the one who stayed beside a dying man. They believed she had done all that for nothing. The lawyer, a calm man with glasses and a stack of papers, opened the folder and began reading. Everyone leaned in. At the time of my passing, the lawyer read, I leave behind my land, the family house, the bakery, my savings account, and all my shares. Tuso smirked and nodded, whispering to Yanni, just wait. He'll probably divide it all. But the next words shocked them. To Nalo, the lawyer continued, who gave me peace in my final days, who treated me with love when others turned away. I leave everything. The room went completely silent. The house, the land, the bakery, the savings, and the stocks, the lawyer repeated. She is my daughter in soul. You could hear a pin drop. Yanni's jaw hung open. Tuso blinked, frozen. Then he stood up quickly. This must be fake, he shouted. There's no way. She tricked him. The lawyer didn't flinch. The will was signed, sealed, and witnessed. It's legal. Yanni looked around, hoping someone would support her. This isn't fair. She was just taking care of him. That doesn't mean she should get everything. But the lawyer only pulled out more papers and calmly said, that's what your uncle wanted. He made it very clear. Tuso threw his calculator on the floor. Yanni stormed out of the room, tears in her eyes, more from shock than sadness. Nalo didn't say a word. She didn't smile, didn't cry. She just lowered her head. She hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't expected this. But Uncle Bako had seen everything. And now, with one final act, he had spoken louder than anyone else ever could. After the will was read and the room filled with angry silence, the lawyer pulled out one more envelope from his bag. It was old, yellowed a little at the corners, and carefully sealed. Your uncle left personal letters for each of you, he said quietly. He wanted them read aloud. Everyone shifted uncomfortably. Yanni crossed her arms. Tuso rolled his eyes. But the lawyer opened the envelope and took out 3 folded letters. He read the first one. To Yanni, he began. The room grew still. The words were short, but they hit hard. Your beauty faded when your heart grew dark. Yanni's face changed in an instant. Her confident smile disappeared. She stood frozen, unable to speak. The words echoed in the room. For someone who loved compliments, who lived for praise and attention, this was like a slap. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it. Her eyes welled up, but she turned around quickly and stormed out of the room, heels clicking against the floor. The lawyer opened the second letter. To Tuso, he read. You calculated your gain, but forgot the currency of kindness. Tuso's hands, which were still gripping his broken calculator, clenched tighter. His face turned red. He looked down, then up, then finally shouted, "This is nonsense." He threw the calculator across the room, where it crashed into the wall and fell apart. He stood up like he wanted to leave, but didn't know where to go. Finally, the lawyer opened the last letter. To Nalo. His voice softened as he read Uncle Bako's words. I pray your roots stay gentle, even when the world grows loud. Nalo's lips trembled. Her hands shook slightly. She lowered her head, and quiet tears rolled down her cheeks. Not because of the house, not because of the land or money, but because someone had seen her. Really seen her. Not just what she did, but who she was. Her love, her patience, her quiet strength. All of it had been noticed by the one person who mattered to her most. In that moment, the noise of anger faded. The fights didn't matter. The money didn't matter. What mattered was that Bako, even in death, had spoken the truth that no one else had the courage to say. The letters weren't about revenge. They were about truth. And the truth burned through all the ego, all the pride, all the selfishness in the room. Only one heart was left whole. And it was the one that gave the most. Nala walked slowly into her old room. The one she had given up without a second thought. But now it didn't feel the same. It wasn't just a small space with a bed anymore. It was filled with something much deeper. The walls, the air, everything felt different. There were flowers on the windowsill from neighbors, small notes tucked into the corners from nurses who had visited, saying thank you for loving him, and soft blankets that bakery staff had dropped off, remembering the man who once helped them in silence. People who once ignored her were now stopping by, just to say a kind word or drop off a gift. One old woman came with a basket of mangoes and said, "Your uncle gave me bread when I couldn't feed my grandchildren. I never forgot." Another man stood outside the gate and left a small card. It read, "He gave so much quietly. Now it's our turn." Nalo felt her heart fill with something she couldn't explain. It wasn't pride. It wasn't joy. It was peace. A quiet kind of peace that comes from knowing love never goes to waste. Days passed, and she walked into the bakery, the one Uncle Bako used to run before he got too sick. Dust covered the shelves. The smell of old flour and empty trays lingered in the air. But when she closed her eyes, she could still hear him humming as he kneaded dough. She could still see his hands, strong but gentle, placing loaves on trays like they were treasures. She decided to open it again. But this time she gave it a new name. Bako's Heart. She painted it in soft red letters above the door. And every Thursday, just as Uncle Bako used to do in secret, she began giving free bread to the elderly in the neighborhood. She didn't make a big show of it. She just placed warm loaves into gentle hands and smiled. Old men came with walking sticks. Grandmothers arrived with quiet eyes and wrinkled hands. They sat for a while, shared memories, and left with full bags and full hearts. The bakery became more than a place to buy bread. It became a place to feel kindness again. People started calling it the House of One Heart, because that's what it was, built from one man's silent giving and one girl's quiet love. And in that little shop, filled with the smell of fresh bread and the echo of remembered kindness, Nalo finally found home again. Months passed, and things changed for everyone. The house that was once filled with arguments, cold looks, and selfish words had now become warm and full of peace. Nalo had turned it into a home, not just for herself, but for others too. The bakery was running well, people came and went with smiles, and every corner of the house felt like it had a heart. But not far away, life wasn't going as smoothly for Yanni and Tuso. Tuso had lost his job. The company he worked for had let him go, and no one else wanted to hire him. He had spent so much time chasing money and status, but now he had nothing. He moved from place to place, looking for someone to help him, but doors stayed closed. Yanni wasn't doing much better. The friends who once praised her beauty and parties stopped answering her calls. No one cared about her new dresses anymore. Slowly, the spotlight she always chased faded, and she was left in silence. One evening, tired and lost, Tuso and Yanni found themselves standing outside Nalo's house. They hadn't spoken to her since the will reading. Now, with nothing left and no one to turn to, they knocked on her door. Nalo opened it. She was wearing a plain apron, flour on her hands, clearly busy with baking, but her face was calm and kind. They looked tired. They looked small. For once, they weren't loud or proud. Without saying much, Nalo stepped aside and let them in. She didn't ask questions or remind them of how they treated her. She just walked into the kitchen and returned with 2 cups of tea. She placed them gently on the table and sat down. This home, she said softly, was built on love. Not money. Not pride. Just love. Tuso and Yanni looked down. The words stung more than any shout ever could. Nalo continued, her voice still calm. If you're ready to give some, you're welcome. The room went quiet. They didn't speak. They didn't touch the tea. They just sat there, realizing what they had missed, what they had thrown away. Not just the house or the bakery, but the chance to be better, to be kind, to be part of something true. After a few minutes, they stood up. Still no words. They walked out slowly, heads low, hearts heavy. And as the door closed behind them, they finally understood something. Love is not a reward you claim. It's a gift you earn. Years later, the town had changed, but one thing stayed the same. Every Thursday morning, the smell of fresh bread filled the air, and laughter danced through the streets. Children, young and curious, would run to the bakery, not just for the free bread, but to sit and listen to Nalo. She had grown into a graceful woman, gentle but strong, known by everyone not just as the bakery owner, but as the girl who once gave up her room for a sick old man when no one else would. The same girl her siblings had once called foolish. Now she sat in a little wooden chair just outside the bakery. Kids gathered at her feet, eyes wide, hearts open. She'd tell them stories, not of princes or riches, but of Uncle Bako. About how he used to wake up early to bake bread for people who had no one. How he smiled even when he was tired. How he gave, not because he had a lot, but because he had a kind heart. The wall behind her held a large mural, painted in bright colors, showing Uncle Bako with a warm smile, handing a loaf of bread to a little girl with bright eyes. That girl was Nalo. The mural had become a symbol in the town, of love, sacrifice, and the kind of reward that doesn't shine, but stays in the heart forever. Sometimes visitors would come to the bakery and hear the story. They'd ask Nalo why she gave up her room, why she made that sacrifice when she had nothing to gain. She would just smile, look around at the children, the happy faces, the old ones who still came for bread every Thursday, and then she'd say in the simplest, softest way, because sometimes, the smallest room holds the greatest reward. No pride. No regret. Just truth. That little room she gave up? It had turned into a legacy. The girl they once laughed at, the girl they called foolish, became a name people spoke with respect. She built something with her heart, not her hands. And that something would live on far beyond her.